Hi, I'm Jessica Northey. I'm with Doc 365, and this is SharePoint Tuesdays. This is our Chief Technology Officer, Rahul, to ask questions about governance today. And our first question is, what is governance? So take it away, Rahul.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Well, first of all, I got to say it's a great topic and it's a great time to be thinking about governance, especially with everything you've been hearing in the news with the Equifax hack and generally compliance and regulations being definitely on on the ramp up here. So it's a common question that's usually only asked when I bring up the term, hey, what are you doing about your governance plan? And really, what is governance is kind of subjective based on what you're after and the type of industry that you're in. But in broad sets, it's all about organizing your information with a set of policies and roles and processes that A, makes the information easier to work with, and B, also helps to align it with your organization rules, regulations, compliances, if you're an audited industry in particular. And lastly, it also just makes the whole platform more scalable and easy to work with.
Awesome, thank you. Do you have a presentation you want to start with today?
Yeah, I think when I heard about the topic, I had a little bit of a deck, so I figured I'm going to showcase it as we go along.
Okay, so you ready for the next question?
Yes, I am.
Okay, so I'm wondering, why should I care about governance and why is it important?
Oh, it's a great question. Maybe more important than what's governance. Why should you care about it, right? I think first and foremost, governance is more than just rules and regulations, because initially maybe it's got something to do with the term. When you bring up the term governance, the immediate knee-jerk reaction is, oh my gosh, yet another set of rules and standards to follow, like I haven't had enough already. But really, I look at it as more of streamlining the information flow within the company to be generally easy to work with. The information, where you store it, where you retrieve it, it just has to make sense. That means every content repository, and I'm not being specific about SharePoint or a file share, any content source has to have some kind of an information structure, or I like to affectionately call it taxonomy, or some kind of a metadata-driven system where it's not just about creating a folder called finance and dumping all your documents in there. It has to tell a story about what is within the collection there. Why is it in this particular repository? Without even opening the document, does it give us any hints about what it contains? Is this a sensitive document? Is this a document that's going to be shared with other departments? Trying to communicate all of that in a standardized fashion is what's governance really all about. And as we do that, it also has a nice side effect of it can help us being compliant if in an audited industry, and also in the long term helps with security, and there's all kinds of benefits that comes with it. But it's really all about being proactive and organizing your information in an effective manner.
Thank you for that answer. So my next question is, as an organization with SharePoint and our file shares and new to the subject, where do I begin?
The most elusive question. It's great to talk about in theory about all the benefits, but how do I get started? And there's probably different ways to approach it, but I figured I'll show you some general highlights of the things you should be watching out for. And let's imagine for a second, if you've got existing file share and or content repositories, this might be kind of how you're structured today, right? Every time you need to find something, it's in a maze. There's duplicate versions. There's more than one logical source to find it. If this is where you're today, how do I get started into making things a little bit better? And my first rule of thumb would be make sure that this is not, while you might care about governance, you can't be a one-man army to try and solve everything. So your incentive might be from an IT side, or you might be the chief legal officer, whatever, whatever is your motivation to do it. Keep in mind that you need buy-in from the entire organization to make this happen. So my first recommendation is, how do I begin, is to make sure that we at least get everyone in the same room. Sometimes a meeting with, conference room meeting with all the business stakeholders can be, in fact, productive. So get a buy-in from both IT and business stakeholders, and largely that's all about educating, especially a senior leadership, about the importance of governance, and any investment that you make into it today can pay dividends down the road. And with that in mind, once you've got your key, you can't get buy-in from everyone on day one. It's going to be a slow process. And my typical approach to that is embrace it. You can't go any faster than the organization is going to let you. We can't push governance down a department that's quite not ready to jump on board yet, and that's fine. The goal is to set up some kind of a governance board or a steering committee, if you will, and start from there. Once you get started, it's all about making sure that we have a recurring path to success. And by that I mean, it's great that we set up a committee and we got started, but we want to make sure that we keep driving that momentum. So making it simple, and try with if let's pick something, right? If you are predominantly a project-focused company, maybe your first information taxonomy you want to tackle is, let's figure out a way to better store our project documents, organized by clients or by a field of expertise, whatever that might be. Let's agree on a consensus of how to store that information. Maybe, I always recommend creating like a wiki site to kind of store the taxonomy or the structure that you came up with, so it's easy to consume, and if someone wants to make a modification to it, they can. And just set that basic foundation in place. Then once you've got high-level content classification space in place, such as department sites or project sites, we can then loop in department owners or business owners, because chances are they know their content better than you do. So once you got that high-level plan in place, loop them in and let them decide how to best organize information from within their own department. And that's why one thing I always like to say about governance is an IT-driven kind of one policy to rule them all rarely works. It has to be on a department by department basis, and has to come from your end users, because chances are they're much more knowledgeable. And that's some very quick high-level tips to get started. Once you've got that general foundation in place, a general practice in place, just make sure to at least meet back once a month and to review the progress we have made, refine it, and keep, make sure that momentum is kept for the duration of that life cycle. Hopefully I answered that without getting into too much detail.
Yes, that was very thorough, and I appreciate that. So my next question is, what are some of the common mistakes that you see being made when an organization tries to get started with governance?
So I guess the most obvious one that comes to mind is, I've talked with a lot of organizations as a consulting role, and I've heard often that we've been down this path, but it hasn't really worked for us. And the biggest reason that I feel is generally because we try to do too much right off the bat, and we all heard of stories of rolling out with a 400-page governance policy document that no one's going to read or follow, and you effectively have created an elaborate process that's difficult to implement and consume. And in many cases, it might have started out with the right intentions, but when a key, if your key information administrator leaves the organization, you have someone new coming in place, they're not going to be up to speed on all the governance policies and everything we have developed in the past. So keeping it simple is probably the biggest tip I can give there. And then the next one would be, while we may have a great start, momentum is quickly lost. It makes sense. It's great that we have some structure, but then we kind of lose steam. And I don't see several organizations, while they started out with the right idea, there's not enough follow-up. So that might be a second reason. And the third, I think I've already talked about in my previous point, is governance is a full organization exercise. It cannot be purely IT driven. That generally resonates very well with what you're trying to solve. So you got to make sure that we get buy-in from everyone. And by everyone, I mean the key business stakeholders or department owners. Get at least one representative from each key department and make sure they're kept part of the process and they get a vote on what's important to them, and making sure everyone's kept in loop. And lastly, I think I could say is really trying to do too much at once. It's very important, especially when we try to tackle something new, if you haven't done it before, like governance within your organization. Even if you've got experience doing it in a previous capacity, keep in mind every organization is new. What's worked in the past may not work in this new setup. So I'd always say to keep an open mind. Do not try to implement perhaps what's previously worked for you. Keep in mind that everything that you applied and enforced in the past may not have the same return on investment in new capacity. So keeping an open mind, being very reactive to the feedback from your end users, and adjusting and refining it constantly is the best way to move forward.
So would you say getting buy-in is probably the most challenging part?
Oh, yeah.
Or?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, it'd be the akin of, Jessica, if I try to enforce how to store your marketing materials, I don't think you would like it a whole much. So I think getting buy-in from everyone is probably the most important piece.
Definitely. So my next question is, in an earlier question that I had, you explained why governance is important. And so I want to know, what are the downsides of not having a governance plan in place?
Okay. That's a good question. So I think the biggest impact that I've seen, well, first off, is it's kind of like I don't know if you heard of carbon monoxide, right? It's odorless, it's colorless. You don't even know you're inhaling a poisonous substance until it becomes an issue. And it's kind of like that, right? You don't really see a big impact or an issue from lack of governance from the get-go. If it's a performance-related issue, you see the impact of that from day one. But as you start building new sites, new content sources, new information repositories, you're growing your information probably at an exponential pace, and it's growing organically and it looks good, but it is quickly getting out of control, and because it's just not a standard defined path of when things get out of control. So not having governance is also equal to having lack of visibility into the information stored within your company. So the lack of insight in itself is a problem, and you see common patterns of issues coming out of that lack of insight. First and foremost is security. Half the time when we get a call for like a review or an assessment, it's likely hot on the heels of some kind of a security issue that the organization encountered, or perhaps some loss of documents, or a information being shared outside of the community that is supposed to be shared with. You get into those reactive kind of situations, and when we should have been more proactive and making sure we took the steps in place right from the get-go to not run into them down the line. And the other side, from a technical side, without a proper governance strategy in place for a platform like SharePoint, Microsoft has published standard rules and guidelines on, hey, you can't have your document library grow beyond a certain size, or having your databases not backed up in a certain way. So you've got the technical limitation that we gotta make sure we enforce it, because SharePoint or a tool by itself is not gonna do it automatically. And it's up to us to make sure we have those sets in place, because that makes it easier to make changes to the platform. Upgrades become a lot easier, because we've run into several instances where there's lots of customizations. There's always the one power user who figures out how to customize the page in their own unique way, and then it doesn't work in a later version. So there's all kinds of platform scalability issues that intrinsically comes out of it. And lastly, we've all seen this before. You have a great collaboration platform, but it can get unwieldy, or the search doesn't work, or there are duplications, and you see users slowly returning back to old habits. They start sending attachments and emails, and information is now stored in network file shares or your personal documents folder. And you see those bad habits start to prop up sporadically throughout the organization, simply because your corporate collaboration platform is too difficult to use. Not sure if all of that made sense, but those are some of the downsides I can think of on the fly.
Yeah, it definitely made sense. And do you have any final tips or suggestions?
I think I'm going to revert back to something I said before. I think it's pretty fair to say that we know why governance is important, and if you can all agree that a properly structured information repository can only be helpful for us. There's all kinds of advantages to making sure our information taxonomy is well defined and protected too at the same time. My one tip would be, if you're starting on this path and if you're relatively new to it, keep it simple is the golden rule here. Make sure you get buy-in from all the stakeholders, and then show return on their investment very, very quickly. Giving a department and their user community a easy to use collaboration site where they can easily find and share information. You just got to do it once, and that in itself can become the case study for the rest of your organization. So keeping it simple, making sure you get input from everyone, and make sure to follow up on it, meet at least once a month so we can keep reviewing and refining it, and understand that it's not a one-time setup kind of a deal. It's something you need to stay on top of and organically grow and adapt with the needs and changes of your organization.
Awesome. Well, thank you for your time. And I know you have a SharePoint Tuesdays every Tuesday, so you guys can join us live for the next one for any Q&A if you have any direct questions. Do you have any ideas for your next topic next week?
I think it might be helpful to kind of talk about topic relative to information and organization in general. So for our next SharePoint Tuesdays, we'll think of a topic that hopefully something like this that you find valuable, and if you've got questions, and you can ask something not as well defined, right? So we'll make sure to pick an obscure thing that you can hopefully find value in.
Yeah, we have a couple of common questions from our clients and potential clients that we'll we'll reach out to that type of topic. But I know you have a webinar coming up. Maybe you can promote that before we close out today.
Oh yes, so we're going to keep at least a monthly webinar going. And our next session, correct me if I'm wrong, is on next week, Wednesday?
Yeah, it is.
Okay, and I believe we were talking about data loss prevention policies. And it's, if you've never worked with the DLP mechanisms or information right management in SharePoint in general, I think it'd be a great topic for you. Simply because a lot of those tools and features have become a lot easier, and it does a lot more than what it might suggest. You know, it's not really all about just DLP. There's lots of analytics and hidden features in there that I think with very little effort you can find great value in. So definitely sign up for that. It's next week Wednesday. If you've been on this invite, you should have received an invitation to the meeting. And we'll be able to hopefully dive in and show you a little bit about Office 365 and SharePoint DLP.
Awesome. Okay, well, I just wanted to wrap this up to say visit us at www.my365.com and email us with info@my365.com if you have any questions. And we'll see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.